Well, hello, my name is Brian Lewis, and today we're going to be talking about decision fatigue. You may not have heard of that phrase before. Sometimes we think that the more options that we provide our prospects and our web visitors, the greater the likelihood that they'll find something that meets their needs. But, visitors arrive on your site with a limited amount of mental energy that they're willing to expend. And by offering too many choices, you actually can create what's called decision fatigue. And there's various factors that could be involved with that. I want to talk about just a few of them. First one is the knowledge that your prospects have about your products or your services, or about your company, or even about your competitive alternatives. I mean, typically the more knowledge that your visitors are going to have about any of those factors, probably the less patience or the less effort that they're going to want to put into viewing various pages on your site. They've already done a lot of the research if they already have that knowledge, or they're looking for something specific. So that's one of the things you want to keep in mind. Another factor is the risk of making a bad decision. Let's say for an example, I'm looking to buy office supplies. If I make the wrong decision, it's not going to be a huge factor. So I probably am not going to want to spend a lot of time on the site, viewing all sorts of different options. On the other hand, if I'm looking to perhaps move to a different CRM system that could have some far-reaching consequences with my business, in that situation, I am willing to look at a lot of alternatives and less likely to suffer from decision fatigue. Another factor would be the amount of distractions that your visitor is typically facing. The more distractions they're facing, probably the less patience and the less effort they're also going to want to put in, which is going to lead to a much quicker onset of decision fatigue. Let's talk about interest and excitement. Sometimes what you sell may be exciting to some people, though they're willing to look at lots of options. And again, they're less likely to suffer decision fatigue versus someone who's looking at researching whatever it is you're selling, unfortunately, as a necessary evil. In that situation, decision fatigue is likely to set in much quicker. And then finally, the sense of urgency. If it's something where they need to be making that decision much, much more quickly than otherwise. So in terms of decision fatigue, let's remember that making a choice requires a certain amount of mental effort on your visitors. And along with the obvious examples of should I buy your product or service, there's a lot of what we call micro decisions. There could be hundreds of micro decisions that your visitors are going through when they're on your site. And to give you some examples, when a prospect lands on your site, they may be thinking, can you even solve my problem? Can I trust you? How do I navigate the site? Where can I find the information I need to help me make my decision? Should I click on this button or link? Do I know what's going to happen if I do that? Should I read this paragraph of text as I'm scrolling through your website? So there's a lot of decisions that your visitors are making, more so than just should I buy a product from you. So again, please be aware of that. That decision fatigue can set in much, much more quickly based on the number of these little micro decisions that your visitors will be incurring. So as a digital marketer, how can we try to mitigate or at least minimize the number of decisions and the decision fatigue that would incur from that? And the first thing is to understand your visitor mindset. In other words, play the role of your visitor. Understand, take a look at the site from their perspective and understand what they're going through. Empathize with them. That'll help you realize what you may be putting them through on your website. Reduce the decision making involved with navigation. And the way you can do that is make your navigation logical, intuitive, label it appropriately, and prioritize it, not so much based on what you want your visitors to see, but on how you anticipate your visitors wanting to browse through your navigation. When it comes to your visual treatments of links and buttons, we tend to see this happen a little too frequently, but sometimes websites don't use consistent visual treatment of buttons and links. So when you decide on what a button should look like, well, essentially what you've done is you've told your web visitor this is a button. Try not to vary from that on other pages, so that way your visitors don't have to wonder, is this a button? And again, that just makes that much more decision making and can lead to decision fatigue. Same thing with font hierarchy. The font hierarchy is very important because as your web visitors are scanning a page, the font hierarchy tells them the relative importance of what they're going to be reading, whether it's a headline, a subhead, bullets, or even the text of the page. You want to be consistent with that. And finally, you want to, if you have various options, it's a lot easier for your visitors to do the comparison when they're focusing on the differences rather than the similarities. So really highlight what is different about the various options than what are the same among them all. So hopefully as you're crafting your site, you'll be able to anticipate what your visitors are going to be encountering and be able to minimize decision fatigue with some of the things that we talked about today. Thanks for watching.